I often get asked how I can tell a better story, and there are a few sort of iron principles. You've got to understand a little bit about how the brain tells our story of the world around us at any given moment. So it's really important at the beginning of the story to grab people's attention. Brains are these prediction machines. They're always trying to predict what's going to happen next in the story of our lives. Curiosity signals to that predictive brain, there's something about the world that you don't know. When something unexpected happens around us, humans uniquely ask, what caused that and what's going to happen next? One of the reasons we tell stories as human beings and swap stories is because we're swapping information about how the world works. So a good story always tends to have this lesson about who you have to be and how you have to act in order to become a bit more heroic. Stories fuse our brains together and get us all overcoming obstacles in pursuit of goals as one connected superorganism. And that's why all compelling storytelling is always about obstacles and goals. The story describes somebody who wants something, but there's an obstacle in their way. But by overcoming that obstacle, they learn something about the world and they achieve the rewards in the happy ending. NASA in the 1960s hit upon this crazy mission that they were going to put a man on the moon before the end of the decade.
It will not be one man going to the moon. It will be an entire nation.
And there have been studies of the internal culture of NASA that have found that that was a real galvanizing story to tell about the mission of the group. Even people who were sort of cleaning the toilets and manning the phones felt completely imbued with this powerful mission that they had.
6, 5, 4, 3.
You can picture that story. This simplicity, this specificity, the ability to visualize the happy ending.
Lack of gravity forces.
Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Hannah Finch, Editor-in-Chief of The Beautiful Truth, and today we're here to talk about one of the most human tools we have for making sense of change, which is story. I'm here with Adam Penny, our CEO at The Beautiful Truth. Adam created the Human Story of Business framework and has spent years helping organizations use story to make business more meaningful. And we're also joined by the wonderful Will Storr, award-winning author and one of the leading voices on why storytelling hits us so deeply. His latest book, A Story is a Deal, digs into the science of why narrative shapes absolutely everything we do. So we're going to start by getting some context for why storytelling matters so much right now, how leaders can use it to navigate uncertainty, and what it means in the age of AI. Let's get started. So Adam, could you just kick us off and set the scene for us? What is unique about this moment that we're living in? Why is storytelling so important right now?
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. I think one of the things obviously we're seeing a lot is there's a lot of anxiety and fear around at the moment. You know, we're in a really uncertain time. Every headline seems to be about crises, you know, be it geopolitical, economic, environmental, social cohesion. You know, it's kind of all baked into a really unknown time for us. I don't know whether it's the most unknown time, but it's leading us all to kind of feel like, okay, well, where is this all going? And I think that it's very easy to feel like there's an inevitability of a doomed world that we're all heading towards. And I think what's interesting to me, and you know, Will in his two books, The Science of Storytelling and A Story is a Deal, kind of covers this, is the brain is this incredible storyteller. So if we are perceiving that that's what's going to happen, it can kind of feel like that's going to be inevitable, but we need to be able to tell these stories of imagination, of possibility, of where it can go right, of what's ahead of us in a positive way, so that we can kind of lead ourselves into that. So I think storytelling in the right way helps to do that. And then I think the second thing for me, which is really where leaders and businesses fit in, is as kind of Will alludes to in his book, any story really throughout history has asked two questions. Who is our character? Who's our lead character really? and who are they going to be at a time of immense change or challenge. And because we're going through that time of immense change and immense challenge, people are asking that question more acutely, and they're asking that of leaders, and they're asking that of businesses. Who is it that you are really? What's the truth of who you are and who you're going to be? And who are you going to be at this time of immense change and challenge? How are you going to respond? So I think that leaders and businesses, if they harness stories in the right way, can give hope to their workforce, hope to their customers, hope to their investors, and really show that way through at a time of change and challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's interesting because I think we're seeing so many businesses really turning to AI in a massive way as sort of the answer to that challenge. And there is, of course, a place for AI. But I'm curious, Will, if you could talk to us about why one of the most ancient tools of leadership that has been used forever is so effective and why we need to lean more on it right now.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So I think to understand why storytelling is such a persuasive kind of technology, you need to understand that its core purpose is to persuade. Human beings are this kind of crazy species of ape that we are, kind of part ape and part ant. So rather than, unlike all the other apes, we don't solve the problems of existence as individuals. We do it in groups, in highly cooperative groups, like a superorganism, like an ant's nest. So in which kind of every individual knows what role they should be playing, and they're all kind of putting together and doing whatever the group is designed to do. And storytelling is the technology that allows us to do that. Storytelling is a technology that kind of takes all these individual brains together, individual brains, and kind of and connects them all together, so that you're all seeing the same goal, you're understanding the same obstacles, you've got kind of the same values, and the same understanding about what is a good person and what is a bad person. All of that stuff comes from storytelling, and that's why it's so crucial that any organization, whether it's a corporation or a political party or an NGO, uses storytelling, because it's story that is binding the individual kind of brains in your organization together, giving it an amazing vision of the future, and giving everyone a sense of meaning and purpose and kind of motivation that's kind of powering them through all these difficult times that they're going to be experiencing as they're striving towards their heroic goals.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. You talked about superorganism there. Could you tell us a bit more, maybe for people who haven't read A Story Is a Deal yet? Can you tell us a bit more about what a superorganism is and sort of how we're all actually a part of one, whether we know it or not? So give us a sense of what it is, and maybe lean a bit more into like how organizations can harness that for themselves.
Yeah, sure. So superorganism is just that idea that an individual is an organism and is an individual organism, but a superorganism is lots of individuals connected together. But each of the individual is playing a particular role to enable the superorganism to achieve its goal. So and that's why people like E.O. Wilson, the evolutionary biologist, used to compare us to ants quite a lot, because ants are behave as a superorganism. So that you get soldier ants and ants that go out hunting food. You get ants that are in charge of kind of burying dead bodies. It's quite extraordinary, the kind of the superorganism of the ant's nest. And human beings, under the power of storytelling, have kind of mastered this art as well, weirdly. So and that's why we're so successful, because we embody everything that makes an individual kind of ape successful, but we also can access the power of the ant. We can also access the power of this kind of mass shared intelligence that enables us to solve problems in the form of superorganisms. And if you look at human society, it's just a bunch of superorganisms, whether it's a football team or a political party or a supermarket chain, or we solve the problems of existence as groups. That's what we do, and that's why we're so successful. But in order to do that, you need story, because every superorganism has a story about who we are, what is a good person, what is a bad person, where are we going, who are our enemies, what are our great heroic stories of the past that we can tap into for inspiration, all of that stuff. It's all powered with story, and that's why story is kind of a non-negotiable if you're trying to organize a
trying to lead an organism, because what you are doing is leading a superorganism, and in order to do that, you've got to understand, storytelling is the kind of the operating system of the superorganism.
I think, Will, and then I think the thing that I think people don't necessarily always get is that story exists regardless of whether people are kind of controlling it or managing it or not. There is a story of a business, regardless of whether that has been shaped and cared for and carefully crafted, whether it's coming out in the culture or anything else. And also, the lower the trust, the less cohesive, I guess, that story is. So then where do you think leadership fits into this?
Well, leaders are the people that have to kind of embody the story. Psychologists talk about this concept of prototypicality. So leaders should be prototypical, which means that they should be, embodying the values, embodying the kind of story of the organism. And I talk about a concept in the stories I call story being, which is just meaning that storytelling isn't enough. Of course, telling a story in the form of a speech or whatever it might be, an earnings call is important, but at least as important is the idea of the leader is this kind of prototypical, kind of heroic character at the head of the organization that really embodies all the values of that organization. Like Pope Francis is a great example, who sort of came in there talking about the Christian value of humility and poverty, and immediately sacks this guy that they called the Bishop of Bling over in Germany, who was sort of building huge palaces and decking out his accommodation with sort of golden baths and enormous fish tanks. So it's embodying the values of the organism. It's extremely important, because people look to the leader to answer the question, who do I have to be in this superorganism in order to thrive, in order to get success? So they look to the leader to kind of project that story.
I remember reading the Howard Gardner book on leadership, What Makes Effective Leaders. And professor of I think leadership at Harvard, but he would kind of has done these kind of deep studies, hasn't he, of leaders. And he kind of brought it down to 4 key components that good leaders have. And one of those 4 was good storytelling. That good leaders tell stories about, or effective leaders tell stories about who I am, who we are, and where we're going. That this is really, really important that leaders understand this and get it right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting when you get into the specifics, because so often a story is being told, but we don't necessarily know what it is or what the story we're in is. And I think that's something, Adam, that you've developed a whole framework around, isn't it? Based on Christopher Booker's 7 Basic Plots, which is an absolute tome of a novel. We were just talking about it. That might be one to get the Cliff Notes on, but it is worth the read. Could you talk to us for a minute about these 4 different plots? Because I think it would be interesting for everyone on the call, as you go through them, to try to identify where your organization is. Like what story you might know instantly as you go through, and that means you're doing really well. You know what story you're in. But if not, it could be an interesting exercise.
I found it fascinating. So as Hannah says, it's kind of a tome of a book. I think he spent. Christopher Booker spent 30 years writing it and looking at stories from the past, looking at, I think it was Jungian psychology he was particularly interested in, looking at Greek myth all the way through and finding these plots that were told again and again and again. And when I read it, I was kind of like, wow, these stories that have been told for generations, and he brings it down to 7, are exactly the stories that we've been telling the business for the past 20 years. It was like, man, there's something in this. We've been doing it kind of unwittingly, without really understanding what we were doing. But there were 4 plots that really kind of came through again and again when I look back at the work and the stories that we told for business. And broadly, you've got sort of the overcoming the monster story of sort of Beowulf or Jaws, and I was like, oh, we told that a similar story, or a story in a similar way for healthcare companies, where there's this enemy at the gate of a disease or a pandemic, and what are we going to do? How are we going to come together to solve this problem and overcome this monster? Or the quest that you see in, I don't know, Lord of the Rings is the classic one, isn't it? and I was kind of like, oh, I feel like we've told this story, particularly for tech companies, where it's kind of like we want to go and find that gold, that chalice, that holy grail, and we're going to get a whole group of experts together to go and get it. Or the rise to greatness, which you have with startups. You know, that story of Harry Potter is we're kind of the underdog, but we've got all this hidden magic, and we're going to go and we're going to go and prove ourselves against all these big behemoths and against unbelievable odds. And even the ethical story, you know, the rebirth, where people kind of realize their failings or where they've gone wrong and come out again. I feel like we've been telling those stories for the past 20 years. Will, you know that book fairly well as well, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was probably the first book on storytelling that I wrote, and there probably wouldn't have been a Science of Storytelling without Christopher Booker's book. Like, I was trying to write my first novel, and I read the 7 Basic Plots, and it just really blew my mind. I think it was the first book that I read, and I think the first book perhaps ever that tried to understand storytelling through the lens of psychology. You know, Jungian psychology is interesting. It's very, I mean, it is very dated. I try to update it, that kind of thing, with the Science of Storytelling. But I think it's a kind of a masterpiece. It is a tome. Read the first half is amazing. The second half goes a bit crazy. But the first half's the ones where it's got all those 7 basic plots in, and it's very compelling, and it's very convincing, and I just think it's just a brilliant work. And if you're really interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of storytelling, it's kind of one of those essential books that you've got to at least read the first half.
And then the other thing I think is really interesting that for me that came out of it is we've been telling stories about how to overcome crises and how to walk through wastelands, you know, and overcome really difficult conditions again and again and again. And it's almost like, you know, it's like there's a code there. Yes. For how we get through them and come out the other side. It's fascinating.
Yeah, and at the heart of it is you know, as you alluded to at the beginning, Adam, it's this idea about the hero, about who are we in those moments of absolute pressure. You know, when our back's against the wall, when times are tough, who are we? You know, it's that sort of question that's at the core of so much of what Christopher Booker talks about.
Yeah. No,
I think that leads in actually to a question we've just had. Which I think is so pertinent to everybody, which is what does it mean for an organization when the story that you're in is mainly owned by the leadership? And it kind of speaks to the superorganism thing, but when the leadership has a story, but others aren't following, are they not telling it well enough? Is it the wrong story? What do you do with that?
So I would say, and this is something that obviously I think it can get a bit lost, is there has to be an authenticity to it, doesn't there? There has to be a truth. There has to be that well, who are we really? And I think that, and again, you touch on it in A Story is a Deal. When there's a disconnect between the outer story and really the inner story, that's when problems happen. That's when the disconnect, the distrust of even of oneself, let alone of the people around you, can really start to set in.
Yeah, and I also think there's a really interesting concept that there's an organizational psychologist called Daniel Cable that talks about this concept that he calls the me in we in organizations, and I think that's really important. I think that organizations often make the mistake of thinking, well, you know, the status, the heroic kind of mantle that the group is offering is enough, so you should be proud to work for Intel, and that should be enough. Yeah. But it isn't. It's like, so yes, we should take pride for working for Intel or Apple or whoever, but I want to go into work and I want myself to feel valued too. And I think the really successful organizations operate on those two levels. That, you know, that they offer a story that you can sort of click into, where we're an amazing company doing amazing things, but once they're at work, you can't be just expected to disappear. We're not actually ants. We're also part ape, and we also want to be celebrated as individuals. And that's what Daniel Cable's work has shown really powerfully. That idea of the me and we, like the really successful organizations. You know, I talk a lot about status, and that's another way of saying feeling like a hero. And you know, we all want to feel that the organization that we're working for is doing something important in the world and something that matters and something that we care about, and that's good. But we also want to feel that we're doing something individually to help that mission. And I think when we feel seen in that slightly cheesy modern kind of parlance, is really important. So and I think when people don't feel seen and appreciated, that's often when they fall out of sync with the story the organisation is telling and feel disidentified with it, which is a big problem.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. You touched on something else there that which I really took on from your first book, was this deal for status and connection, that these two drivers, and again it was like a light bulb moment for me when I realized every story either ends with the hero elevating his status or elevating his connection, or it goes down. It's like that's the outcome. You either go up or you go down in terms of status and connection.
Yeah, these are the ultimate goals, that because we're this tribal animal, we're programmed by evolution to want to connect into our superorganism and feel a sense of belongingness. But once we're in the superorganism, just belonging isn't enough. We want to offer value. We want to offer value to the tribe, and so there's two fundamental kind of human wants, well, their needs actually, which is connection and status. We want to feel loved and accepted, but we want to feel that we're offering value to other people as well. And these amazing parts of the kind of human animal that is kind of the best of human nature in a way. And that's absolutely right. And that's why storytelling again and again and again and again subconsciously is an instruction manual about how to win connection and status, and also how to avoid losing connection and status in the form of a tragedy.
Can you talk, Will, for a minute about the kind of practicalities of this storytelling? So if we think about an organization that is telling a story, but they have thousands of people feeling disconnected from that story, which many organizations, you might be on this call in that position. Like what are some of the practical things that leaders can do to actually recognize that that's even the case, because some might be oblivious, and then B, correct it?
Well, I think there are kind of three elements to kind of inserting all of this into an organization and creating kind of culture change or kind of improving the culture. And the first one is that storytelling. You've got to be telling an optimistic, positive story about the future that's kind of hopefully simple, easy to understand, that everyone can sign on to. And it doesn't have to be some great virtuous we're trying to change the world. You could be making a better light bulb, but you're still making people's lives better in a certain way, and that's good. That's heroic, and so it's tapping into that sense of the kind of heroic aspect of your story. Your organization needs a functional status game, so that's the me and we part. So people need to go to work and feel that their individual contribution matters and is being seen, but is rewarded, not necessarily with money. It's not all about money, but just the feeling of being seen and appreciated and applauded when you deserve to be applauded, whether it's praise or whether it's a prize or whether it's whatever it is. So a functional fair status game. And then the final element, I think, is that prototypical leadership. You need leaders that really embody the values and the story of the organization that people can look up to and take inspiration from, and feel that they're kind of in reliable hands, that somebody that is captaining that story in a way that's functional. So those are the three elements, I think: story, the status game, and the leadership.
Interesting.
Adam, would you have anything to add to that? You're a filmmaker and you've told stories through different mediums.
Yeah, so I kind of from a different angle. I think I think one of the challenges in business that we're still kind of grappling with is an efficiency dominated mindset, that has kind of grown from obviously the Industrial Revolution, but it's become, I think, worse with the advent of smartphones and everything else. You're on all the time, and you're supposed to deliver all the time. And I think then the efficiency dominated mindset starts to undermine any story that the business is trying to tell about how much it values you, that you're part of the superorganism, that your status is recognized, that you're valued. And I think what can happen very much is it's all about efficiency. I need to be doing work all the time. I need to be on all the time. I need to be delivering all the time, because that's what a business actually values. It doesn't necessarily value people. And I think that's where the disconnect can come in. I think that's why people get lost within business, is because what's being said and what's being done are two different things. And I think we're seeing that a lot at the moment because of everything that's going on in the world. I don't really think about that, Will. Would you concur? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think we were talking before the call about people who I think there's a problem at the moment where people kind of have lost touch with us with this idea that you need to tell a positive story, even in really difficult times. It's those positive stories that really inspire people. And you know, when you are surrounded by doom and gloom, it maybe takes a bit of a visionary to come up with this positive story. But it's really essential. You know, we're not. We tend to, our attention naturally goes towards the negative because it's a threat, and it's important that we attend to the threat. But threats aren't really what inspire us. I mean, we're inspired by rivalry, but that's a different thing. You know, it's you know, it's really important that leaders have a positive story to tell, especially, you know, political leaders.
Definitely, and I think we do see the negative stories rise, and we had a question about that, saying, how do we counter the leaders who are peddling fake news and positioning things as legitimate stories? You're kind of talking about the positive storytelling. And I would love if with that you also talked about kind of keeping that positive storytelling as authentic as possible, because sometimes people hear story and they think greenwashing, they think a story to paper over the ugly truth. And that is not what we're talking about today. We're talking about telling a positive story that's actually true. And it might be having to find that story first. But can you talk to us a bit about that, Will or Adam? Whoever wants to take it.
I mean, I just think about the, you know, our current government in the UK, who are, you know, who I think is quite well known, are quite skeptical about concepts around storytelling. But and I think to their cost, you know, when Keir Starmer's government got elected, people were happy to see the change. They were voted in, you know, in good numbers, but they immediately started telling this sort of very depressing story about the big economic black hole. And okay, that's fine, but there was no positive story to go with it, and the people responded very negatively to that. And you know, to their cost, they still don't seem to have learned that lesson. I mean, I think with this, you know, with the two budgets, there's been no positive story around it. I mean, you know, think what you like about austerity. It was really grim austerity, and you know, the story that George Osborne and David Cameron told around the necessity for austerity. You know, who knows how true that was? But they had a story, and it was about we're in this situation because of this, and but this is what we're going to do, and this is where we're going to get to, and it's all going to be worth it, and it's temporary. You know, we just got to get through this dark period, and so we're having a similar set of economic circumstances now economically, but there's no story about. I noticed that before the recent budget, Tony Blair's foundation kind of expressed the opinion that Rachel, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reid, should make the point that these are temporary measures, and we're just going through a short time of struggle. It's going to be you know, in order to have this kind of sunlit future, which is great. You know, Tony Blair was a brilliant storyteller, and I thought that's exactly right. But there was no story to go along with this budget, and I think to their continual cost, it's a shame that they seem so skeptical about the necessity to have a good story to tell about the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting. When I think about that question is I think that we still talk about story like it's something that's happening out there, but it's also happening in here. We're always telling our own selves stories all the time, and I think one of the tricks is to know what's triggering you, what story you're telling about yourself, so that you at least know the game inside your own head. And from there, you can kind of go, okay, well, let's look a bit deeper. If it's something that's bothering me, let's look at the facts and then things alongside it. Because otherwise you can get caught up in your own story and your own views about things, right or wrong.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And you know, and I think that's, you know, quite a long time ago now, I wrote a book called The Heretics, which is all about how is it that really smart people end up believing really crazy things. And you know, the answer was that's how I came upon the subject of storytelling. It's because we're storytellers, and that's how you know, an extremely smart historian like David Irving can decide that Hitler was a friend of the Jews, in his own words, and just blow his own life up because he's, you know, he's a storyteller, and you know, there's this great sort of daft idea that people who fall for misinformation in inverted commas are stupid somehow, but they're not stupid. You know, really, really smart people believe some really, really crazy things, and that's because the brain isn't a logic processor. The brain is a storyteller, and that's why you have to, communicate with story and understand how powerful story is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think especially now that people trust raw data way less than they ever have. Numbers mean a lot less anyway. So when you're connecting emotionally, it makes such a difference.
Yeah.
We had another good question, which is about kind of the actual structure of storytelling. So how much do story devices like surprise, novelty, creative play really feed into storytelling? Are those really important? Like if you're trying to, talk to your organization and you want to bring them along with you, should you be trying to ride those waves? Or is that not so essential?
I mean, I think for me, it comes back to knowing what story you're telling. If you're going to kind of surprise and delight and do all those different things that good stories do, then the context has to be right for people to be able to take that on. If you try and jolt people into a different mindset, it feels fake and people switch off. So I think you've got to go, okay, well, what's the context of storytelling? What's the context that we're putting this story into when it comes to the business, and then kind of work from there, because that inauthenticity can just pull you right out.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of those models can be really useful for just exercising the brain and getting people to think in the right ways. But I think fundamentally, it's just those basic 3 acts: crisis, struggle, resolution, or however you want to kind of phrase that. In business storytelling, you need to understand what your takeaway message is. What is that one idea we're trying to communicate with?
Yeah.
And then in amongst all that, you need to get as many emotional moments as possible, because I think it's the emotional moments that people remember, and it's the emotional moments that are really are the mark of a good story. It's like if people aren't feeling emotional when they're hearing your story, then it's not a great story.
That's why all the Christmas adverts hit so hard.
Yes, exactly. John Lewis is so good at that. Yeah, exactly.
They're so good. Yeah. I think that's another question, is how can you tell when a story is actually landing? Is there a way to tell? Like, is it just like try to read people's faces? Often we're not actually with people when these stories are landing. It's over email or whatever. Is there a way to tell?
I find it quite difficult, because especially when you're talking to a crowd, like the face of concentrating is this blank face, and sometimes you can think, is this everyone's just staring at me, what's going on? So it can be really difficult, but I think people do tell you, like, if they've really enjoyed what you're saying. We are these status giving animals. We like to give people status and praise, which is great, and people tend to do that. But really, again, it is about, for me, it's about that emotionality. If you're making people feel emotional, then you're winning.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's hard as well, because you very often if I think if a story's hitting, certainly in the business world, I think you step into that story being mode, you start to embody it. I think there's something that you recognize about yourself that you value that's in that story, and I think that's when it really starts to land. But as Will says, certainly our experience as well, you don't always know when it's happening, because that's quite an intimate thing. And so people can kind of withdraw and just kind of try and process it, rather than kind of, jump up and give you applause. Yeah. So it's an interesting thing.
I'd love to talk a bit more about positive storytelling, because you've said, positive storytelling is essential. And even though we have so much negative storytelling, it's really important to be telling the positive ones. What do you do if you're in a situation where it doesn't feel like there is a positive story to tell? And, where on this call here, we're not political organizations trying to tell a really negative story to bring people on board through that kind of campaign. So how do we kind of search? Is it searching for a positive story? Does it sometimes help to be really honest and just say, there's not actually a positive story to tell right now?
Well, I think there are always, if you're a leader of an organization, there is always a positive story, because you're always trying to lead the organization to somewhere better, right? And that's your story, that's your vision of the future. Yeah. So if a leader was to say to me, we haven't got a positive story to tell, I'd be thinking, are you the right leader for this organization? Like, where are you trying to take your people if you can't think of anything positive? But also, I really do think it's essential that they're honest about struggles, and I think that this is a problem. The kind of my kind of go-to definition, my kind of core definition of what a story is it's a description of the overcoming of an obstacle in pursuit of a goal. And so your goal is that positive part of it. But the obstacle is essential, because the obstacle makes it a story. The obstacle gives it the emotionality. The bigger the obstacle, the more the greater the emotion. But also, we've been talking a bit about authenticity, and that's the authenticity. Like one of my favorite ads that I've seen, because I used to teach it, so I've seen it sort of dozens and dozens of times, probably more than 100 times. It still gives me a lump in the throat. Is for Open University, and they had this amazing ad for Open University where they just showed underneath inspiring Coldplay music, but lots of people, hardworking mums and dads working really hard in their spare time, in their coffee breaks, between dropping the kids off at school on these qualifications, and then the ad spot ends with them all getting their certificates and being hugged by their family and all that stuff. But what was great about that ad was, like, in the middle, at the sort of the midpoint of the ad, they showed all these parents, all these hardworking people giving up, throwing their pencils across the room, smashing their heads with their hands or whatever, and so that they weren't afraid to say, this is going to be hard. You're studying for a degree here. It's going to be difficult, and without that kind of authentic description of struggle in the middle of the ad, you wouldn't have got the payoff at the end when they're being hugged by their children and husbands and wives wouldn't be emotional. So that's always been a real lesson for me, and I think especially in the business space, people are afraid to really go there and describe the obstacles, but people really respond to that. They respond to the authenticity, they respond to the honesty of that. Like if you've got a leader saying, like I noticed recently, the new CEO of Intel, my brother works for Intel, that's why they're always on my mind a bit, and they've been going through terrible times, especially since Apple stopped using Intel chips. And he did a talk when he just took over recently, saying that 20 years ago we were the world leaders, and now we're not even in the top 10 of chip production. And it's like, as long as it that's, if you're working for him, to have somebody with that level of honesty is good, as long as there's this is what we're going to do about it, and this is the plan, and this is what we're going to do, because then you feel like, someone's leveling with me. I'm not getting spin, I'm getting the truth. So I think that's really, really crucial.
No, I absolutely agree, and I think it's hard, isn't it? Because we again and again find businesses that don't want to do that. But again, it comes back to that: which story are you telling? Is it overcoming the monster? What is that challenge? Is it the monster? Is it coming of age and therefore sort of you're kind of going on that voyage of discovery yourself? Is it the quest? What are those things that how are you then going into that deeply psychological view of what that obstacle is, or how you're going to frame it, how you're going to put a story around it?
And I love that framework. It's so simple. It's kind of what you learn in primary school about how to tell a story, but overcoming an obstacle in pursuit of a goal is so simple to remember, actually. I wonder if you could give us, Will, if there's one kind of practical tip to take to work tomorrow, to take into our lives, to make us better storytellers. What would it be?
So my favorite tip, because it's not one that's that obvious, and it applies not only to business storytelling but to writing novels and screenplays and everything, is specificity. Specificity is so important. So and that's on every level of the story. So specificity in language, specificity in your vision of the future. Bill Gates, when he was setting up Microsoft, said he wanted to see a future when there was a PC on the desk in every home in America. That's so specific and so visual. It's a great vision. It's a great piece of kind of storytelling. Specificity in the message that you're trying to communicate with your story. I'm a great believer in the phrase, the Robert Carville's phrase, if you say three things, you don't say anything. What's that one message that you want this story to deliver? So on every level, the more specific you can be, I think the better your story. Vagueness is the enemy of storytelling. Specificity is your best friend.
Nice.
Yeah, that's so good. Do you have one, Adam?
I think in the context that we have again and again is authenticity and making it human. I think a lot of businesses feel like they don't want to talk to people, or they don't want to talk to employees about, actually this is where we really are. Or this is how we really feel. And we always try and encourage people to kind of start from a point of authenticity, because people's bullshit detectors are greater than they ever have been. And the thing that you can just, kind of put a story out there that doesn't have a context and that doesn't have an understanding of the authenticity of you or the people around you will never work. So I think that for me, there's got to be that journey of self-understanding, or that journey of truth finding before you start telling stories in order for it to land.
Yeah, so good. Well, I can hardly believe it, guys, but we're coming up to time. So it's flown by. I've loved it. I've talked about this with both of you many times, and I've learned more today again. I hope everyone enjoyed it out there. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be sending out the storytelling guide to everyone who joined. For now, we would like to leave you with one last story, which is the story of the beautiful truth. So thank you again, and bye from us.
Thanks
Thank you,
all.
everybody.
Companies should not just pursue the narrow self-interest of maximizing profit, but rather strive to make the society a better place.
Every company, every employee should always be asking this question: what is your purpose for existence? And checking to see if there's an answer.
What do we really believe in? Why are we here?
What is it that's really important to me, and what am I here to do? What is the impact that I can have?
Being focused on something that's so much bigger than just myself is what gets me up every day.
This is our desire to be connected to something larger than ourselves. This is our desire to change the world, to create the world we envision. That's very personal.
It's much more a process of hope and engagement and wonder.
We're always searching, aren't we? We just go on, inventing, looking, exploring. That's what's so special about humans.
Lots of people are going to tell you it's impossible, but if you're doing anything that's going to have any kind of an impact, it's definitely not going to be easy.
No one individual can change a society. No one company could change a society. But many companies together can change a society.
What do we exist for? Or what kind of a story do we want to tell?